For those of you who already know me, I've always been a massive Tales of fan. No matter the title, I will always give it a fair chance and an honest evaluation, regardless how good or bad it may be. It is a series that I've followed for multiple decades and one that I will continue to support regardless of how each new entry turns out. I know for certain there's going to be a lot of people who will not agree with my take, and that's fine. My perspective comes from a long appreciation of what originally defined the series and how that formula has gradually and steadily changed over time. While my idea of what defines the series may differ from somebody else's, it's not meant to be a fact, or just a blind hatred for something I know nothing about for the sake of arguing. No matter the game or topic, there will always be somebody that is willing to obsess over something and consistently argue over nothing. To those, I just mostly sigh and shake my head. The reason I'm so willing to do this is because of the Remastered project, which Bandai Namco will hopefully continue if they see that this sells well, bringing older titles back with some quality of life changes to help them really stand out and to be showcased to a newer generation. Hopefully continuing with Xillia 2, Abyss, Destiny DC, and Destiny 2 along with Fantasia, followed by the rest of the series. I doubt that'll ever become a reality, but
Courage is the magic that turns dreams into reality.
so all I have to say is take my money and give us what your loyal fans are asking for, Bandai.
Or continue to prove my point by showcasing your absolute lack of care by remastering a game that does not even need a remaster. At this point, why not remaster Xillia and Arise while you're at it, while ignoring your fanbase? What a joke of a company. But this is kind of the move that I would expect from Bandai Namco.
Tales of Xillia has always been one of my least favorite entries. It's not the worst, that would have to be taken solely by Arise and Xillia. I do have constructive reasonings as to why I disliked it so much, and it mostly has to do with the similarities to the more recent titles like with Arise, which I will never acknowledge as a Tales game due to its removal of so many integral features, gameplay elements, and more importantly, its poor character development and story. If you want to be ranted at for an hour, you can check out that retrospective here. After playing through Tales of Xillia Remastered, I can now formulate my issues and concerns more cohesively than if I was simply reviewing the original from years ago as if I didn't go back and play through it, but rather based a review solely on my younger memories alone. As I have grown since then, my perspectives on video games have changed from mindless gaming to experience something, be that a story, gameplay, or something on a more deeper meaning. Either way, if you're new to the Tales of series, it's one of the longest running and most prominent JRPG franchises of the last 30 years. Every game has been unique, every story and cast memorable across 3 generations. With 17 main entries and numerous spin-offs, gacha titles, and unported versions that have never made it to Western audiences, you are bound to find things that you will love and equally hate, followed by a dedicated fanbase of talented fan translators and emulation porters making the dream a reality if you want to play them now instead of waiting for something that might not ever happen. What makes this series even more interesting is how each title originally offered 40 to 60 hours minimum to complete the main story, which included Fantasia on the SNES, something that has become shorter and shorter over the years. This drop in quality from the old standard to around 30 or fewer hours now has a lot to do with Bandai Namco and many other publishers pushing more visual content at players with each release that degrades the experience, from DLC to pre-purchase unlockables and immediate access to grade shops. Bandai continues to remove the important features of these games, to the point that new players never understand what these games were all about since it's mostly going to be visual eye candy. It offers a smoother experience, sure, but it removes all of the replay value to unlock these things in-game and makes the game shorter when you can buy the best gear early on without any effort on your part, making it very basic gameplay. You could argue that it's making games more accessible to a newer generation, but honestly, I don't like this whole idea of streamlining games that are meant to be slowly enjoyed, not rushed through. If you're not willing to spend, at the bare minimum, 50 hours with a JRPG, then why are you even playing one in the first place? Because it's flashy, stylish, rotting your brain with eye candy and dopamine every 5 seconds? It's not a genre that has you getting in or getting out quickly. And don't try to argue that this is how the genre should be now because how formats changed over time. That's a very poor excuse. You're meant to bond with characters. You're meant to dig into their worlds, their lore and backstories with preferably hours upon hours of optional dialogue and side stories that bring you closer to them. Take the Trails of series, for example. It's practically 95% dialogue and 5% gameplay, but it's one of the most in-depth and vastly interconnected series of plots, subplots, characters, world building, political conflicts, and insanely detailed character development. Now, when it comes to Tales games, it's become less and less about writing the story and more about how much flair it can push out through their partnered studio, Ufotable, to make you think like it's a decent game. But still, it's either a hit or a miss, and in this case, you just can't satisfy both parties. With this character story section, it's going to contain many spoilers, because there's no way to talk about how poorly developed the story is within Xillia, and we will also be spoiling some other topics from story-based games without explaining the main plots and how everything unfolds. So if you want to avoid any of these spoilers, please skip this part now. But I do highly advise sticking around and taking in the information. In my recent retrospective, I mentioned that I hated every single character outside of Alvin and Gaius with my knowledge of the game from 2011. Two characters within the story who stood out as decently developed, with motives and goals that made sense as they were slowly but steadily revealed over time. The rest of the party just didn't have that type of character building. In fact, they were all so underdeveloped that I couldn't help but fall asleep if and when you play through both routes of Jude and Mila's story and place them side by side as the events unfold. It's simply inconsistent, most likely because they were trying to write both routes separately to give players different feelings for each protagonist, shining a light on them individually, but didn't recontextualize anything. So one character might act assertive in one route, but then passive and a background character in the other. It just doesn't add up. Feelings don't properly correlate, and nor do the understandings. It's not just with Jude and Mila, but many characters, the timelines of events, the reconstruction of society and the world. It doesn't make sense. You could literally remove 3 of the main cast and nothing would have changed. Honestly, I would have probably enjoyed it more if that was the case, because most of them felt injected solely for later use in another character's story arc, and that was the extent of their character development. Not even skits could bring much out of them when all is said and done. It's like playing through The Last of Us for the first time. Imagine the game opening up with Joel losing his daughter and then that's it. Nothing else. Before we even got to know who she was or saw their relationship build up during that short interaction, instead skipping to the dead scene and then his future self, and never once talked about it again. That moment would hit less hard because we wouldn't have the emotional context or reason to care. It's just another, oh, he lost some girl, whatever, without the build up. It's just another random death with no meaningful attachment behind it, unless you're just somebody who is easily impressionable or has lost somebody in a similar way. The delivery will fall flat unless we have built an interest in them. That's not to say that you can't do this within a story's context, as it all depends on how well the writer can format the before and after moments. Even though you know the end result, it can still work out, but it's extremely difficult to pull off. The same can be said about many other deaths in Xillia. There's no build-up around Agria, arguably the best villain character in the game, as she literally flips off the main cast while falling to her death. A perfect reflection of how I felt being dragged along with them and their stories. It just happens, and I feel like it was a pointless death as you were expected to care about her after being introduced to her about 4 or 5 times briefly before the ending. Whether it's her death or the prince's death, which happens after you meet him, or the injuries inflicted onto others as a result of the group's or Exodus's actions, none of it carries the weight that it should because the story never takes the time to earn those moments through world or character building as people are losing their lives left and right. You're just expected to care when you have no obligation to. I'd like to bring up a game like Symphonia. When the group arrives at their first human ranch with Genus to meet up with an elderly lady known as Marble, you don't know her for very long, but the game pushes all of the knowledge of her and Genus' relationship onto you, the player. She's being abused, potentially killed in the process of human experimentation. And she's so sweet and kind, and shortly after this, she is killed off, as she sacrifices her very life for the children that she cares so deeply about. It's quick, but at the very least you form some kind of an emotional bond with her as you do everything to protect her. This type of storytelling for side characters and even the main cast is simply absent because it has nothing meaningful to contribute to the player. I also kind of forgot to mention before talking about the different stories, but Tales of Xillia has a dual protagonist story featuring Jude and Mila, so you have to play through Jude's story first before tackling Mila's portion, or it'll just make even more less sense due to the information dumps that you are going to miss out on because you're not playing both stories. Even though most of it is the same story, it's mostly going to be offering things that you otherwise would not be aware of on a single playthrough. And beneath it all is a bunch of intermingled stories about two worlds sealed away from each other. One is Remastered, a world that uses spirit-based technology to live in harmony with nature, and the other is Olympus, which uses Spyrix technology to kill spirits to function. They are at odds with one another because they have different political views. And so the story begins in Riza Maxia following Jude Mathis, a young medical student living in the city of Fenmont, or Mila Maxwell, a spirit in human form claiming to be the Lord of Spirits. Jude is portrayed as an intellectual student, but he is also the biggest pushover imaginable. After getting involved in a conflict with the local knights while searching for his missing professor, he ends up meeting Mila, a woman who again claims to be Maxwell, the Lord of Spirits. Jude ends up following her into the research center to find his professor and ends up stumbling upon a machine that has been harnessing mana and killing people and spirits alike to power the cannon, which will then be later used to break the seal between both worlds, which is the main goal of the organization Exodus that was formed to find a way back home, where Mila and Maxwell had originally thought that it was a weapon to kill Mila, as she was created as a decoy sent out by the real Lord of Spirits to put an end to their squabbles. In the process, the four great spirits entrusted Jude with the role of guiding Mila back on her martyr journey after they fail to stop the cannon, of which the spirits are then sealed away inside before the duo escapes. In the end, Jude or Mila and friends convince the real Maxwell, Lord of Spirits, to let her become the new Maxwell because he can't do a damn thing about it, because he too was captured by the cannon. And they want this because his way of thinking is wrong, which is such a hypocritical way of thinking when Jude confronts the other planet, saying what they have been doing to survive for the last X number of years is wrong, and they should be ashamed of themselves for not confiding in them and their ideals, locked away in another world, when they are just as human as the rest of them. Don't even sugarcoat the fact that Riza Maxians have mana lobes which are used to channel their powers, while Olympians are lacking this fundamental trait and have to use Spyrix technology to do the most basic things to survive, even if it means war for some. The problem is that while the story starts out decently cohesive, Jude himself is dead weight. He doesn't do anything. He's just a pushover from start to finish. His only real role is to help people, no matter how many times they stab him in the back. Looking at you, Elvin. Even then, his character feels pointless. He spends most of the game lecturing others on the morality of choices while doing the same things he criticizes them for, especially when he tries to push his own ideas onto Maxwell, a literal god, while condemning the Exodus faction when they act the same way he does, despite his father being from the other world and helping to build its technology as he pushes away all reasoning because of his obsession with Mila. There's also a sudden jump in the story when he turns his shy, indecisive nature suddenly into that of a leader, without any context. In short, he is a prepubescent child doing whatever he wants not because of who his character is, but rather because he wants to get closer to Mila, who has no interest in him, until the very end of the game when she develops a sudden interest. But the relationship is never developed upon throughout the journey. It's just Jude freaking out and being overly obsessed with this woman who has her attention on the mission that is in front of her. Jude acts like a 15-year-old, and his infatuation with Mila crosses into uncomfortable territory. It's never outright stated, but his obsession with her drives almost every action that he takes. This makes him more like a lovesick stalker than an interesting protagonist. Meanwhile, Mila, who has existed for over 2,000 years, even if this has been implanted memories, is treated like she is a handful of years older than him. This doesn't make their dynamic any less awkward. You don't get any meaningful exposure with the two. Mila has a mission and doesn't care about anyone else. You could argue that this is character development as she turns from a highly apathetic and insensitive person to somebody who is willing to sacrifice herself for humanity and her friends as she grows to understand them and their fleeting goals. But at every corner, Jude is there fighting with himself to tell her how much he loves her but never gets the chance to, and in the end lives with that regret. Unless you count the pigeon that flies from his academy into the spirit realm or open field signifying that they will still be together in this world. even if they are no longer together. It just doesn't feel like it was put together well enough. Mila just continues with her fascination of humans and how they behave and doesn't get the hint, and when she does, she just offs herself, which is such a dumb conclusion to a convoluted story of events that does not go anywhere. Once again, that obsession ruins Jude's character. Everything he does revolves around Mila, not for anything else. But their relationship never earns the emotional weight that the game tries to push onto you. You could remove Jude entirely, focus exclusively on Mila's story, and also remove Leia, who only exists because she is his childhood friend, and even Elise, who only contributes to one side story involving Zhao and the cog that ignites Exodus's plan. We don't know her parents or why Zhao killed them outside of the fact that he is a bandit, and she never mentions it, while also projecting her brat-like personality from that point on through Tipo halfway through the game, as he is an embodiment of her inner feelings. And guess what? The story wouldn't lose anything. The only characters that actually stand out are Mila, Alvin, and Rowan. Alvin's story is solid, but he's gone for a large portion of the game due to the fact that he is acting as a double agent from the other world who will do anything to get back home, including killing off a few children. Rowan is a tactician, serving mostly as the group's guiding voice as he is a lot older than them, trying to lead the kids towards a better future separated from his own. Unfortunately, neither of their arcs are fully explored and both eventually fade away without much development. Mila is just okay. I can understand why she acts the way that she does, because she's hardwired to think and act on the whims of the real Lord of Spirits. But eventually, along the way, she is coerced into straying from that path, be that to her new companions or simply the Force Spirits. It matters not. It is a decent progression on her character that does not go further than this. Look, I don't play JRPGs for the flashy visuals. I play them for an assortment of different reasons depending on the game or series in question. Everybody has their own view on what something should or shouldn't be. You might be in it for the combat, the development of the story, or just because you're bored out of your mind. That's perfectly fine. I'm not here to judge your reasons, and I'm not here for you to judge me. But what's wrong with Xillia years ago still stands today. It's a flawed system. You get underdeveloped characters, a rushed story, and too many loopholes when each of their arcs are placed together. None of it helps the game's case. When I'm falling asleep mid-game, desperately wanting to play a game like this, but having to take naps here and there. I know it's not great, and the fact that after a few weeks of the game being released, there have only been about 6, 7, or 8% of the player base that have even bothered to finish the game's main story, no matter if it's Mila's or Jude's, and also 40 to 50% haven't finished the game's Chapter 1. Most stopping and most likely refunding the game should tell you all you need to know about the general consensus. Now that we've gotten the main story issues out of the way, moving on to the issues with the remastered game itself, not any bias on my part or just from hating this particular title, it's just not great. But it's also not surprising. Bandai Namco continues to deliver poor ports one after the other, and Tales of Xillia was problematic right from the start. Many players, myself included, had to deal with frame rate issues, as well as a deceleration or an acceleration issue in gameplay during the first hour before we could even play the game properly. This happened because of the inconsistent use of VSync and how the game interacts with high refresh rate monitors. For example, I use a 165Hz monitor, but I prefer to stream at 60 frames per second so that it's the best way to maintain smooth, flashy visuals without introducing lag from ray tracing or particle effects. Normally, I will lower my refresh to 120 to prevent screen tears on my end while also making the recordings a lot smoother, then lock the game at 60 frames with VSync on. But in this case, doing that slowed the game down, desynced the audio and visuals, and made it pretty much unplayable. The only way to fix this was to disable VSync entirely, switch the monitor to 60Hz, and then relaunch the game. Only then did it finally run normally. This tells you that they haven't optimized it well at all, as it feels extremely lazy. The grade system found in every Tales title is used for New Game Plus. Here you play, grind, and earn points in different ways, be that using a bunch of combos, gathering a lot of different quests, etc., to unlock the content for future runs. Things like transferring your guild, experience, levels, weapons, and skits. But Bandai keeps handing out massive handicaps to both new and returning players in these remasters. Just like with Grace's F, I don't really mind it for veterans who have already played the game multiple times and who want to just get all of that stuff out of the way so they can go back to grinding. The issue is that newcomers end up with an artificially lower difficulty curve and a drastically reduced playtime. What was once a 50 to 70 hour game now becomes 20 hours for a first run and another 15 for Mila's story. I highly recommend not enabling the grade system on your first playthrough, as it will make the game longer, but that's how the original game was meant to be experienced. Otherwise, everything in this game will die too fast and you'll miss out on the depth of combat when you've reached level 80 by the end of the game without the need of farming. Even when you want to crank the difficulty to hard or unknown, it doesn't help as you're stacking infinite heals and unlocked skills into bullet sponges. The game is also extremely loud and poorly done with its audio differences. At default settings, combat is grating on the ears, and in certain instances, the audio is very low for voice actors far off in the distance, like with the handmaiden Ivar when he's screaming at you in the party.
I'm gonna stay here and fight. Mila, you should go.
Are you sure, Jude?
I couldn't help overhearing your plan with these perfect ears of mine!
Isn't that...
You'll most likely never hear him if you adjusted the audio in any way, shape, or form to make it more bearable for yourself. That also being said, having the characters repeating the same lines over and over and over again and again each time you walk through a new zone or transition to a new location does not make it any less annoying.
I'm hungry, and if you don't eat a lot, you'll never grow bazungas.
Yes, Elise, we get it. You want to eat lots of food so you get massive tits. Shut up. It's nice to see the cameo outfits and battle themes from classics like Fantasia and Destiny, but it's also very frustrating. The issue with the fully handed out DLC packages and outfits in these newer releases is that they strip away the replay value that the older titles had. Back then, you could earn most of these outfits and special features through tough battles and side quests or even minigames. You didn't have to open your wallet just to unlock something new or gain a bunch of Gald and EXP boosters to make the gameplay trivial. It's a shame that Bandai shifted focus and fell into the trend of squeezing more money from fans over virtual cosmetics inside of a single-player game. But that's just how things are now, and around the time that Graces and Xillia were originally released, the original games had already very few unlockable outfits, and most of the good ones were locked behind paywalls. Lastly, I did not like the new box art. Maybe it's just me being biased towards Mitsumi Inamada's art style, which he shared with Kosuke Fukushima back in the day, but I just never liked the comparison. Jude has always looked so much more different, while Mila is utterly beautiful, and side by side they simply clash and don't showcase the character's true essence. Putting them side by side with Production IG Studios' take on it, I want you to actually look at each character, the way that they are drawn and perceived, based on their own designs. And do you see how Jude should be perceived and how Mila fits each and every time? In the original game, Jude looks a lot more smug and childish. In the remastered version, he looks like he's gonna kick your ass as a rough and tumble type, and with Production IG, he is perceived as a gentle, soft-faced, reserved type of person, which is an accurate depiction of how he plays in-game, while Mila looks either lost, focused, or confused. The same could be said about the original cast of characters. They didn't really add any of the other characters here, so we can't make any similar comparisons, but we can tell that they matched their personalities based on how they were drawn. This is a minor grievance that I have, as this was one of Inumada's final pieces before her passing. It just feels more insulting, and seeing Mila alongside Jude here feels even more off and wrong with his facial features than it did with the original. He is a shy dude, he's not assertive, and that should be reflected in his design. But I digress. Visually, this game is not great, but it's not terrible either. When I hear the word remastered, I expect improved graphics and a degree of polish, or at least a touch-up. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, because there's no effort to enhance the visuals or even adjust the in-game audio imbalances. so it feels like a direct port with no updates to justify calling it a remaster aside from pricing it at full cost on the PC platform. At the very least, most DLC is included, which I suppose is an upgrade from the original that totaled over $120 USD in optional content, most of which was cosmetic. But looking back at the developers credited for Tales of Graces F and Symphonia, it seems like different teams were chosen each and every time, mainly to cut costs and also speed up development. Graces F was a solid remaster, while Symphonia was their first and internal port, but one of their worst ports at launch, which makes it seem like they improved the second time around with Tales of Vesperia, which is generally considered a good port. Outsourcing work can easily lower quality through poor communication, a lack of understanding of a game's technical breakdowns, the loss of creative direction, and uneven results from teams that don't fully grasp what they are supposed to deliver. Getting the games onto PC alone is not enough, especially when the emulated version runs similarly, if not identically, with a brighter background and very few quality of life adjustments. This becomes more noticeable during gameplay. When characters move a bit further from the camera, their outlines grow blurrier instead of staying sharp and defined. It's as if the original assets were simply copied over without any touch-ups. The same goes for the audio, with loud effects, quiet voices, inconsistent volume levels, and poor balancing across the board. To call it anything higher than a mid-tier attempt would be insulting to the term remastered. Unfortunately, a lot of gamers have become desensitized to low-quality efforts from major developers over the last couple of years, and that's not exclusive to remasters but with new titles alike, to the point where anything that is slightly above generic is praised as a masterpiece. In this case, there are so many issues currently with this released version. For a $50 remaster, these issues stand out clearly despite being small. The returning music from the older Tales titles adds a lot of flair and familiarity, but I can't say that I enjoyed Xillia's soundtrack, particularly with Jude's story. It leans way too heavily in a fast-paced tune that just doesn't fit his personality or style. Mila's story fares better, featuring battle themes with fast-paced violin strings that match her tone and direction more effectively. It's just a shame that Jude did not have this same treatment. Across the entire series, I've usually come away remembering at least one standout song, but here, all I can ever think about is echoing endlessly throughout every single city cutscene, not just when we're walking around through the towns, no, in the actual story background cutscenes playing on a loop alongside the constant banter.
Are you okay? You look pale.
I'm fine. I just keep...
This further confirms my idea that this is a copy and paste format rather than a faithful remaster to increase the quality and fix issues. Overall, it's exactly like the original in every way, stripped of effort, bare minimum work with no meaningful touch-ups, so don't go into this game expecting anything of a superior high quality. I want to say that one redeeming feature of Xillia was the combat or the world exploration, but once again, mentioning before, if you decide to enable most of the grade system, it will undermine everything that the original game built for itself. The lithium orb system crumbles apart as the limited amount of points you build for your characters is set to 1 and doesn't feel like you are shaping each playstyle when you can choose everything. And of course the map showcasing everything including Ifrit's treasures. Why go on a scavenger hunt or feel rewarded for finding a secret location when the secret is blatantly showcased to you no matter where you go, and not only the secrets, but all of the items and enemies. These are things that you are meant to find on your own, even if they are mostly cosmetics. Some of them offer high amounts of gald and resources that will help you in more difficult battles. But since you enabled most of these features, that means you don't need gald, you don't need resources, and you don't need anything else because it has already been given to you for nothing. I cannot stress enough how much you will ruin the experience for yourself by enabling these features. It does nothing but trivialize this entire experience into a short and slow hollow story that does not go anywhere because the battles will be over with no challenge on your part. You won't be doing much besides the same stun lock combos before dashing away to gain back your AC and continuing the stun lock combo, which doesn't even go that high because you're too strong and everything dies too quickly. Combat then turns into a snooze fest as you run past everything. Nothing on the ground will matter, and none of the secrets will either. At this point, you'll be walking and running from point A to point B, interacting with the story and then repeating the same process, but you're looking for a story that is mediocre. Not even the endgame X dungeon is really worth your time and effort at that point, because Tales of Xillia was one of the very few games that had cameo battles and references cut from the development, which only puts more salt in your open wound of distaste for the title, stepping slightly more away from the roots of the series despite having a ton of references through the DLC purchases. At the end of the day, I don't criticize games because I enjoy tearing them apart and creating a divide within a community and causing a controversy. I do it because I care about a series and the people who want to play it. I want developers and players to notice when corners are cut, when passion is replaced with profit, and when something that once had heart becomes a shallow reflection of itself. Tales of Xillia was not a great game when it came out. The same could be said about it now. I cannot recommend it. It's not a hidden gem, it's not misunderstood, it's simply a lesser effort compared to what Bandai Namco has proven time and time again that they are capable of, but are simply unwilling to replicate because they don't want to spend the extra time or the extra money to make it a reality. I will still support the remaster in the hopes that it will lead to better ports of the older titles that truly define the series in the process. But if this is going to be the standard going forward, then it's clear that Bandai cares less about nurturing the community that tried its best to keep the game series alive over the last 3 decades, and more about seeing how much they don't have to do until people are no longer willing to put up with their bullshit, in which their only real threat is shutting down yet again another studio or project that they cannot see themselves making an absurd amount of money on while putting out as little effort as possible. So hopefully we can see more of their original titles in the future through this remastered project, but honestly at this point I'm more inclined to revisiting the originals on their proper consoles or through emulation. You would be shocked with how much work the fan translation team has put in to provide such an incredible job bringing these classics to Western audiences, and I cannot recommend their work enough. So if you haven't experienced them yet, now is the perfect time.